How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Really good.
Where exactly are you?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
Oh, I love Austin, Texas.
I know, I just recorded a keynote for a huge conference in Brazil, and the guy who was my host is apparently also a huge Austin fan. So it's very funny to see how we spread all over.
But where are you originally from?
Well, that's always a tricky question, isn't it, Mr. Boston? How do you define that question?
Well, I think it's a great place to start, like how we define ourselves, where we see ourselves, where we want to see ourselves. I mean, I think that's probably why we're having a chat, because we probably are concerned with these very questions. So
Yeah.
because I am the host, I'm allowed to be like the host. I'm happy to answer. I will answer any and all of your questions.
No, I'm not trying to be cheeky, but I'm just saying that's a really interesting question. And
Yeah.
Pico IR, a travel writer, did a whole TED talk on this whole question about where you're from, because it's like, where's your family lineage from? Where were you born? Where did you go to school? Where were you raised? Where do you live now? Like, these are all different, potentially geographic or ethnic identities. So I was born in Germany, of a German mother and American father, who then moved to the south of the U.S. And he's from New Jersey, she's from Germany, and I don't know why they picked Atlanta in the middle of like all the racial upheaval that was happening in Atlanta in the late 60s, early 70s. But my dad wanted to be around things that were new. He just didn't want it to be old infrastructure. He wanted to be where things were being built that were new. So I think that is a deep part of my DNA. And then I grew up in the South with a curly-haired, dark-haired, fast-talking me in Hotlanta, and then moved to New York and found my people. And like, that's where you all are. And then it was New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and now Austin.
This question, because normally I don't really ask where people are from. I generally ask people, especially if I'm just getting to know them, like in this sort of environment, it would be more like, well, tell me something interesting, like about you that you don't normally share, or something that does define you, that, it would be more like that. So, yeah. So how do you define yourself? You've lived in lots of different places, but
yeah, I mean, I think that actually I could tie it back to the story, which is that I describe myself as from the South, but not of the South. And I think that is a key sort of thing. Like, I'm of many communities, but I'm not necessarily from or like embedded in them, right? So I traffic between business and technology and society and consciousness, but I wouldn't say that I'm like deeply raised in any one of those. I kind of traffic between them. And so I have this really interesting, I could think like sort of personal narrative where I get to be an observer and a weaver across lots of different things. And I straddle generations, I straddle astrology signs, I straddle, like, I'm sort of never like solidly in one dimension.
You're weaving all these things, and you've managed to create a life for yourself in Austin, Texas, and you advise companies and corporations. That's a big part of what you do, right? Or at least some of what you do. I don't want to say.
Yeah. No, yeah.
So tell me how you got into that.
So I think that the fastest way to define my trajectory or my career is that I'm insatiably curious. I mean, like, I was probably that little kid that made everybody crazy early on, and I always wanted to understand why things happened and how they fit together. And so my career I was fortunate to find a creative world, the world of advertising, when I was really young, because all the rest of it when I was growing up was like teacher, doctor, lawyer, engineer, wife, like those didn't quite banker. Those were the only options that were presented to me at the time. And I'm like, no, none of those are quite working. But I had this insatiable desire to kind of like learn things and turn other people onto it. And so advertising became this amazing place to go and like meet creative people and be in that environment. And I loved it until, technology really changed the industry a lot. And I started thinking a lot about A, the role of that industry, and B, understanding how the power we have to shape things for people and the stories that we tell for people and how they feel about themselves in those stories. And so I realized that what we were not paying attention to was how quickly things were changing. And so 15 or 16 years ago, I became unusually good at synthesizing information, like helping people understand, here are the key demographic shifts and lifestyle shifts and technology shifts and shopping changes and blah, blah, blah. I'm weaving them all together, literally like knitting these big, huge maps together so that people, because here's the deal, I don't want to be blindsided. I hate being blindsided. Like, it's really one of my giant phobias or fears. And so how can I prevent other people from being blindsided? And so if you look at all this stuff, it kind of shows you where things are headed. And so then it just sort of led to being asked to do a lot more innovation work, which then led to really being more upstream strategic work, which then led to a whole bunch of helping corporations figure out how to get out of a place where they were stuck and not realizing the world had changed around them. Right? In 2008, the world had radically changed and they couldn't build with the same operating system they'd had before. They didn't understand why. So helping them understand how things had shifted and changed. And then I just got really frustrated. And I built a lot of things because I'm frustrated. And one of the things that I shifted was because the organizations just weren't able to hear what we had to say, right? They think the world is flat. We think the world is round. If we don't agree, then we can't build a solution that makes sense, right? If I want to build a certain kind of thing that can go over the edge and you're like, oh my God, we can't do that. Then like, why am I here? So I stopped trying to shift and change giant organizations that didn't have an ability to sense and respond to change and decided to join the disruptors and was invited to help build an artificial intelligence company, built a conference on the 7 most disruptive technologies, designed it, pretty interestingly to help people really understand what these technology, like what it was, why it matters and where it's going ×7. And you realize again, how woefully unprepared we are for what's about to happen. I got to moderate an amazing panel at South by on the future of human intelligence with 3 people who are building like way out on the edge going, oh my God, we're really, really unprepared. And so for the last few years, I've really been on more of a mission to help people better prepare. And what I'm realizing is I keep stepping further back away from the technology and more to A, how do we think? B, how do we need to build it? And then what does leadership look like? So there's a whole reframing of how we approach the work that we do, because I just keep trying to step back to where people can actually hear the conversation.
So why do you think these companies that obviously are interested in what the future holds, why are some more myopic than others, and what are they myopic about?
There's also pre 2020 and where we are now. So I do think there's been a shift, but I think prior to that, I don't know that they were really interested in the future. They were interested in making sure they had sustainable businesses or consistently growing businesses. That was really the focus, right? Consistently growing, scalable, predictable, efficient. That was the mantra of big businesses, like big, huge corporations. We had the opportunity to work with some of the biggest, trying to figure out really big strategic questions for them. And you try and introduce like a new way of thinking, and it's like the system just rejects it in a pretty like significant way, because it wasn't designed to bring in variability. It wasn't designed to look for new and innovation. It wasn't designed to test and to try and iteratively build. Like none of these practices were in any way built into a Six Sigma, efficiency-driven organization. And so as the world has shifted to be, the mandate is constant innovation, they are really, really unprepared culturally for it. And so I think it's about building a really different understanding of what their role is and how do you approach that role.
So you think there may have been a shift because I assume because of COVID?
Well, because I think that so many of the things that people like me have been preaching for a long time. I've looked at the list of other people that you've interviewed, and David Orban and Dan Kraft and Amber Case. I mean, these are amazing people who have been talking about this stuff for a long time. And, we're always told, I was told, too expensive, too disruptive, too impractical, like it just could never happen. And so when the world was suddenly thrust into it, and all the things that they thought were impractical or not possible now became the survival things, right? Or the things that were considered cannibalistic now literally became the only way to be able to conduct business. And suddenly, aperture opens. But interesting though, I thought, oh my gosh, now everybody knows. Like, cool, the work is done. Like I'm literally in the middle of finishing a book and I was like, oh my God, no one needs my book anymore. Like they all got it now. They all woke up. And then what you realize quickly into it is like, oh no, they didn't, right? They became aware of some things and are trying to figure out how to put it back into its old model and trying to figure out how these new awakenings shift, or they can, sort of reel them back in or sort of put them back to a place that's familiar. And that is not the opportunity.
Well, let's bring it to life a little bit. So I assume what you're talking about, for example, is, we need workers to come in 9 to 5 to physical spaces, or, we need to have, in-person meetings for such and such. Now, obviously that has not been, you haven't been able to do that. And so to keep going, or we have to shift from physical retail to completely online for a period.
But even, I'll just back up on the worker thing. It's actually, I think, more insidious than that, because rather than just saying we need to have people back, because why do we want people back? So that we can make sure that they're getting their work done, right? We can ensure productivity. And in the lieu of being able to do that, we're going to do a lot of surveillance things. We're going to put a bunch of software on people's computers now where we can surveil them and make sure that they're really working as hard as we want them to. Like that's the scary part of it. It's like taking that, what I call a 20th century mindset and putting it into 21st century tools. Right? When we have the ability to do those kinds of things, it's actually worse.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I hadn't even thought of that particular, I mean, I hadn't thought of it in that setting. And look, you know, quite frankly, look, being on both sides of it, not run a big corporation, but try and run some very, very small, tiny corporation, is that you let people go and work on at home and so on, especially at times where there is no work. You know, and well, what are they doing? You're paying them and so on. So what is the balance? I mean, look, these are ethical, we're not even getting into the bioethical right now. We're getting into sort of contemporaneous ethical situations. You want people to be safe, to be efficient, to work, and you want to trust them. And at the same time, you know, some people don't actually do the
Well,
work.
and so here's, do we want them to be efficient, or do we want them to be innovative, right? Do we want
Well,
them to be,
I guess it depends. I personally don't, and I spoke to David all about this, you know, don't necessarily believe that everybody's an entrepreneur. I don't. I think you know, there are some people who like to be, you know, I'm getting my 9 to 5, and we're not talking about the future of jobs as a totality, but in the now, I don't know that everybody's an entrepreneur and everybody shouldn't go to college. I don't
that's not
personally
what I'm
believe
saying. I'm saying
no.
that even if you're in a business process role, you still need to be innovative, right? New tools are coming in, new ways of doing things, being able to respond. I mean, I'm just telling you, one of the most places where that needs one of the biggest overhauls is in purchasing. What is it called? Procurement, right? Like that's a very, what you would argue, kind of straightforward, kind of prescribed task. And yet there's a ton of innovation when you start to think about the fact that we're going to be buying software services that are learning all the time, right? And people want to have predicted outcomes when we don't know what the predicted outcome is, or predicted timeline when we don't know what the predicted timeline is, or you're going to be working with more collaborative people. Who owns the IP? I mean, every single function, Johnny, is going to have to be sort of rethought. And so as we're in that place, we do want to breed that there is a certain level of expectation for creative thinking and innovative thinking and curiosity. Learn, like, you know, in downtime, learn.
I completely agree with this. I mean, you have to, you know, I think in order to retain workers, and even the way one thinks of work, and we could get into all sorts of probably digressions about universal basic income and what it means to work and the value of work and so on and so forth. We could go down all these rabbit holes. But I mean, practically speaking, we want our workers to have all of these things and be efficient and it to be symbiotic, holistic even. We can throw out all these words. But at the end of the day, we also want to ensure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing in this
Okay,
new year of.
There's a way of designing that. So I'm just going to say, first I'll make the distinction between the future of work and the future of working. So what you're talking about when you talk about UBI and the roles that we have on the planet and the way that we express our unique value and talents is the future of work. And that is a huge conversation that very, very few people are thinking about. They're only thinking about it through the UBI lens, but there's way bigger stuff to think about, or additional stuff to think about. But the future of working, which is how do we work, right? When we are paid and using our energy in that way, how do we do it? And if you look at a company like Siemens, they've got 380,000 employees, and they've decided that anybody can work from home. I think that it's not necessarily work from anywhere. So I don't know if you can work from Bali. Like I think there might be like 2 days a week to some sort of place that you coordinate with others. So that what we're thinking is much more fluid around this, right? I call it status fluid, but much more dynamic, much more fluid, much more hybrid. It doesn't have to be sort of one way or another. But companies that have a really clear purpose are better enabled to go do this because everyone understands what they're working toward. A company, all that work that we've done around corporate culture and values, this is where it becomes really handy. What we found is companies that have, I haven't found this, like Adam Grant from Harvard found that companies that have strong ties, meaning that they really do have strong values and strong communication already built into the organization, are actually doing really well in this remote work world and being able to pivot really quickly. And companies that didn't have strong ties are becoming much more fiefdoms and siloed and, you know, hoarding information, and it's not going super well. So there's not one blanket solution to all of this. It's how you actually, again, weave, right? Culture and technology and purpose and expectation and workflow and the tools that help navigate all that in really much more robust and confident ways.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that are familiar with for me because, I mean, frankly, I read, you know, FM's, I think it was this second sort of future book called Telespheres, and I think it was 1973 or 75. And I mean, it talks about all of this. So both the concepts and how we live and how we do this, you know, and like I suddenly remembered as I was talking to you, like him telling me how he never wanted to have a bestseller. I'm like, you know, look, you just got booked on blah, blah. And he's like, no, but I wouldn't be doing my job. And like, it's taken, you know, 30 years and a pandemic for all these ideas to be, you know, basically adopted because, not because we could, because we had to.
Yeah, and I was not even
And
adopted, right? Being at least curious about and experimenting with at this moment. But I think that we're really, I mean, you know, when I go out and talk to technologists or designers or entrepreneurs who are literally building the future, and you ask them how far along we are, people would say 1%. And whether that was Google or an additive manufacturer or people who are building a distributed internet, like we're 1%, and maybe now the pandemic has, you know, gotten us to 2%, but we're still a long way off from where it is that we get to be in terms of all this work that FM and others were envisioning. And so I think that we're just right now trying to build the capacities for it. We're trying to learn how to learn and learn how to change and how to respond. You know, I would say the toughest job in the whole entire country right now, I would argue, school superintendent. There is no more difficult job. They are in real time trying to take in so many asteroids that are coming at them from the state and their expectations, from parents with expectations, with trying, you know, safety regulations in the CDC and their expectations. They can't just say, hey, we're not going to open for 6 months like a store or a restaurant can, right? They don't get to just sort of like go out of business. They, you know, like they are under such pressure, and they have to, in real time, continuously redesign solutions and communicate those out effectively.
no, I think you're right, but I would argue that it actually goes, you know, in real time to the mayor, to the governor, to, well, you'd think the president, but we'll scratch that. But, you know, I mean, all these people have to mark out this really terrible equation, you know, the health and safety of their populace, and in the case of schools, the you know, the education of the young, and in the case of the workplace, pure economics, and you're balancing people's health and life between safety, and in the case of children, the future, I guess, on some level. How would you prepare people for that choice? I mean, you're right, it's a really difficult choice to make, and you're getting so much input left, right, and center. So as somebody who models these sorts of things in the future, like what advice would you give to these people?
Well, you know, first, I think it's having compassion for it. Like I wrote a note actually to our school superintendent the other day and just said, I've been thinking about writing, I've been sending you psychic emails for the last, you know, 4 months, but I actually feel like I should write one right now. And says, I really admire how much you guys are navigating this, how you're navigating this, the amount of time that you've put into. No one got a summer break, right? Everyone has been trying to do 3 jobs at the same time. And I don't think we really have enough compassion for what that looks like and feels like. So both for themselves and for others, like just take a deep damn breath and, you know, appreciate the work that people are doing right now. Because I think there's a lot of entitled parents who are really angry and freaking out on things and haven't spent a lot of time thinking and researching and doing some of the stuff that the school board has and others have. And they just want, you know, immediate answers, and they want their perspective to supersede all other perspectives. And I just think that that's part of our problem, right? So that's number one. And then I think number 2 is really strong communication. I think that people want to know why. And so this idea about bringing stakeholders in and problem solving together. So it's not like that you just have to sit in your office and like figure it out for everybody else, that you are bringing in people in and having these conversations with them and trying to figure out the trade-offs and trying to figure out where one supersedes another, or are there hybrid models that make sense, or can we try this for a bit and see how it works and then learn and then figure out how to either scale it or grow it or shift it if we need to. Like, I just think it's about building much more dynamic possibilities, right?
Well, there's 2 things that I liked. Not that I didn't like everything that you said, but there's 2 particular. I mean, I like that, first of all, that your solution was much more of a empathic, or at least sort of it came from an emotional place rather than, you know, here's, you know, 5 points that you must consider. I mean, I like that. And then secondly, I like that, and it's very in keeping with the FM thing. See, I'm trying to plug it all the time. See, it's ingrained, but it's ingrained. So it really wasn't, but it is this idea that it has to be fluid, that you have to be pragmatic, because no one has any I'm allowed to swear on this, of course I am. We don't have the answers, none of us do, and there's so much information coming through. And so as long as, and this is the thing, we have trust in those that we are put in charge of some of these things, then actually there's hope.
Well, partly it's for the person that's in charge, and then partly it's the system. Like my bigger frustration right now is less with a person than it is with a system that is designed to create that checks and balances around that.
Well, yes, I mean, and this is
right now is lacking in a pretty significant way.
I mean, some of those systems are there. I mean, then it's about who's going to communicate them, right? We have a CDC, we have the World Health Organization, we have various systems in place that, for the most part, yes, failures, bad economics, one could argue, mistakes historically, but we do have, especially in the case of health, we do have systems that, for the most part, have run relatively efficiently. So, but we're now in a very weird
well, if you
place
have, again, but if you have a country that is the largest funder of the World Health Organization that decides to pull out because of whatever reason they're want to throw their weight around, as our weight around, and doesn't really look to try and help solve. I read a long article this weekend about all the successes that the World Health Organization has had, and yes, and the constraints that they have of 194 nations trying to figure out how to collaborate and figure out like how you don't undermine the sovereignty of these various countries, but you make sure that people are held accountable for sharing information in real time, right? China didn't share necessarily, potentially, the information as quickly as they could have. Do we, slap their wrist or don't we? So again, it's about, these are all systems that have been designed and that we either have faith in or that we don't have faith in. And so, and that we feel as though we can shift. And I'm not saying all systems that have been created in 1944 should be the systems that still exist now. We need to adapt them, but I think there needs to be a way of being able to think through that in a more, again, collaborative, respectful, data-driven way. And, we don't trust the data, we don't trust each other, we are intentionally polarizing. I had a breakdown day. Like, I mean, for the most part, I'm pretty optimistic and pretty energized. And I'm out there, really grateful that I get to hold the space for what comes next because I'm not facing danger at this moment. But there was one day wherein, our president went into a factory that was making masks. Honeywell, had diverted their other manufacturing to make masks and blatantly didn't wear a mask. And it wasn't because he was being an idiot, it's because it just signaled to everybody else now that they should have doubt, and to everybody else that it should be now a battle when it didn't need to be a battle. There are already so many things that we needed to sort through together in real time that the last thing we need to do is make it polarized. So when we are intentionally putting in discord, it makes me insane.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really a model for that. I mean, I've often thought about, both the historical sort of genesis of this country and how it came together with all these checks and balances, and then sort of thought about like, well, how would FM explain Trump, etc., and worse than Trump in a way, all his minions, these people, some of whom are quite intelligent.
That's the part. Like, where are our senators? Like, where are our senators that are thinking through this? And again, I will say that Trump is masterful. Like, in one stroke, and this is not a political commentary thing, and people can vote however they want. Although I really do think that we were heading toward a pretty dangerous cliff. And so I actually asked my father to not vote this time. I pled with him that as an 86-year-old man, to think about his grandchildren and the fact that they will have to live for decades with the consequences. So he has decided to abstain. So point
that's good in Texas, yeah.
He's in Florida, which is actually almost as bad.
Even better. Well, good job. Well done.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
And he was really gracious. Like, I really appreciated that my dad believed that. But I just go back to, what kind of future do you want to create and to build? And we have the choices to do this right now. And we have choices to not frighten people. So I think, I was thinking about and preparing for this interview, like, what am I most excited about with the future? What am I most frightened by? I actually have a whole map. I have a tool that I use to help people think through the multiple motions of the future. What am I relieved by? I don't worry about something that's going to get me in my lifetime. And I'm grateful that someone's already solved that problem, right? What am I inspired by? What am I frustrated by? And what am I fearful of? It's kind of like a SWOT analysis. And when you actually map all that stuff out, it makes it a little easier to go, wow, I don't have to feel like only optimistic or only pessimistic. I can actually frame it through different lenses, and the things I'm frustrated by or fearful of, I can go and change, right? I can figure out how to make better. And I am really fearful that we are in a time where people are not making long-term, really healthy decisions, and they are trading on and exploiting people's fear. And in fear, we make really bad decisions, both individually and collectively. Right? We are then drawn to made up stories and to conspiracy theories and to things that aren't in any way in our best interest, but that we sort of march toward. And we've seen it happen over and over and over again around the world. And I am really, really afraid that if we continue down a narrative in which everyone should be scared, we will end up continuously polarized and making horrible decisions.
So how do we, so you've given me the fear piece of your chart, or however you describe your map. You haven't given me the other pieces.
Well, I mean, I can work through all of them, I mean, what I'm relieved by is I think there's such advances that are happening in science that I do believe in my lifetime cancer is not going to get me. I really I think that if you read Peter Diamandis' book right now, The Future is Faster Than You Think. They'll talk about 16,000 diseases that will be eradicated in a very short period of time. We're cracking the code on a whole bunch of genetic science. So I actually find that to be something that I am very relieved by. And I do think that I am relieved by the fact that people are starting to think about systems and not trying to do this from such an interventionist place, that we are starting to look at things in a more holistic way. So when I start to see that you can take certain, like there's a thing called regen villages, started by James Ehrlich out of Stanford, in which you use AI to be able to create clean energy, clean water, clean waste, and really grow food in a more sustainable and more resilient way, that they're able to create almost like self-contained communities that are able to throw off enough extra to be able to take care of their neighbors nearby. And really, so it's high tech meets high touch community. They really want to pull people together, and everything's built in a really sustainaable way. And I go, oh my God, isn't that like amazing? Like what technology allows us to do now, right? We can 3D print a house for $7,000. That might solve the problem around universal housing. Right?
Well, you can tie both of those together, because you could probably do a house with a whole hydroponic system that's probably completely self-sustainable, that's actually having fish that you can then eat if you're a pescatarian, and tomatoes and whatever other things in. That's the new business. You should start that.
Village, he actually is describing it as like a village OS, like an operating system for the communities of the future. He calls it the Tesla of eco-villages. Like I get super excited about that and think that's what technology is designed for, right? That's what we can do, is we can actually improve quality of life and accessibility for more people to this kind of life. That's phenomenal, right? I'm inspired by the fact that we can find anybody you want to around the world and collaborate with them. Like that is very exciting to me. You and I can suddenly meet each other, have this conversation. I love the fact that technologies can come in and really disrupt things. One of the things I champion is a project called Holochain, which is considered an evolution or a very different way of thinking about distributed internet than blockchain. It's more flexible, scalable, significantly cheaper, and will allow us to be able to coordinate and exchange resources and create value in a really disruptive way, like peer-to-peer to exponential max, which means that we can think about redesigning social media, transportation companies, food distribution, like all that's like super exciting to me, what is possible, which is why I'm such a champion of Holochain. But I am frustrated by things, and I am frightened by things. I built things to try and mitigate where I'm frustrated or where I'm fearful.
You're also a hedge fund. You're hedging. You're hedging against your nightmares, which again, I think we all do to some degree. I think we all.
But more actively, like I do think that what we're trying to do is call people to action, because people think, oh, I don't know how to help with the future. And I do think that, there's two questions as a compass that we use for all of our strategic work, which is what does the future need and expect of us? And what are you unique position to create and contribute to that? And that's as an individual, a team, an organization, an industry. I can tell a whole industry has an obligation to something, or a nation. And if you scope it that way, you start to think, well, gosh, what am I in a unique position to create and contribute? So if I'm frustrated that, there is a lack of diversity certainly in technology thinking, which borders on fright, because I think that we end up with a lot of bias, then how can I fix that problem? And so we just launched the Femme Futurist Society, which is a whole collection of interviews with amazingly brilliant futurists around the world who happen to all be women, which will be great to be able to work out the balance on your interview list of amazing people. Because I think that portion of the conversation is often neglected, and not just neglected, but just like not considered. Like it's out of balance, it's out of whack. Not enough women are in technology, not enough women are in AI or cybersecurity or robotics. We just need more diversity of all kinds. So that's at least one way I can try and solve that. And if I'm frightened that kids are scared to death of the future and are getting a really horrible narrative of the future and feel like they've got no place in it, I go create the career fair for the future, which I introduce college and high school kids to the leading innovators at South by Southwest. Right? So I'm just saying, it's like you can use that map in any way you want. You can make yourself feel great about things. You can stop worrying about things. You can inspire by things, or you can go fucking build things that need to go get built, or champion things that are out there.
On the one hand, like you're in Austin, so that cuts you a huge break, right? Because you can't.
I'm in Austin. Yeah.
No, but I'm joking. This is my English sense of humor. This is like my I have to deliver it deadpan, and I don't think I've been in America far too long. Where I'm like, yeah. So, the Silicon Valley, the thing that there is no app for or no technology for that I know of are the things that you highlighted at the beginning of our conversation. How we mitigate, well, not just in the beginning, just now, this distrustful environment that we find ourselves in. I mean, I think it really does boil down to trust and communication. So how much
and intent. I think intent is a big part of it. I think we need to build business models that have humans at the center of them. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that in the last 200 years or 300 years, never mind moving forward. But
well, that's a whole new system. And again, I did that. I mean, that's interesting because I do think in order to have certainly the values that I have, or at least I was going to say that I aspire to, but hopefully I have, or at least most of them, and then the others that I aspire to. In order to have them, then capitalism, certainly the way it stands right now, doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't. So, and if you, again, if you...
Statement. I don't know that that's true.
I'm sorry?
I don't know that I fully agree with that declaration.
Well, again, I mean, if we're looking at models of both efficiency and use of capital as defined by Marx, where we have winners and losers, there are so many industries that if we look at the future of work that are in effect meaningless today, but the systems haven't really caught up to the fact that we could have self-driving trucks on the road tomorrow, fleets of them, and put out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of truck drivers, as well as everything that supports those truck drivers. So what do we do? I mean, so what I'm saying is the modality of capitalism is that we have to take advantage of those cogs. Those cogs are just about efficiency. And so if we're going to have a society where we can, I guess Silicon Valley will say that we could train those truck drivers to be coders. Now, that may work for some truck drivers, for sure. I'm not sure it's going to work for all truck drivers. But anyway, I'm being slightly... I guess provocative, but I'm not meaning to be provocative, but again, you're in the sort of both corporate milieu and the milieu of Silicon Valley.
I just look at it differently and advocate for something different, which is the fact that I do think that purpose and profit can exist together. You know, I just wrote a thing about Milton Friedman's 50th anniversary, and you know, there's some parts of him I agreed with. Like, I agree that companies should not be philanthropic entities in which they just extract a whole bunch of value and then take a little bit and transfer it over there to try and solve a problem that really has nothing to do with their business model because it makes them feel good. Good old CSR, right? He was not an advocate of it, and I'm actually not an advocate of it. But I am really an advocate of the fact that if every single choice that a business makes is designed to be able to add value to the overall, you know, group of stakeholders, which includes employees and community and partners and investors, then you actually make really good decisions, right? And you do actually build really strong companies that can be both profitable and add value to the planet, right? But what we have done is we've divorced companies from any externalities, both in real time and in the future. And that's the really dangerous thing. Like, I don't know if you've been watching, there's a documentary that just launched on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. And it's now all the guys who built the social media companies now are going, whoopsie, I wish we hadn't done that, right? But they're still counting their millions and billions while they're doing that. And so I am so frustrated. I'm like hurling socks at my TV as I'm watching it because I'm like, you know what? There's a way that you could have built that. And so let me start. One, it was maybe a little accidental. Like, you didn't realize 2 billion people were going to use our product and that it would have this implication. Okay, cool. But once you start recognizing it, you will hear people say in there, Johnny, profitability became the only thing, business model and figuring out that advertising was the only model, replicating that across Silicon Valley, and now not knowing how to stop the machine, right? They could take the like button away. They could not just like feed you the content that makes you angry or depressed. They could figure out how not to exploit the worst of you and actually figure out a way to, you know, empower the best of you. Technology can serve. It doesn't have to stalk. It can empower. It doesn't have to exploit.
I agree with that statement. It's the previous one that I'm not sure about. It's the statement. I mean, look, for me, it boils down to value. What that means, it's a definition. Again, you know, value, you know, when you're Facebook or when you're Apple, is about your stock price. That's what it's about. You know, when you start talking about how those systems do not work in terms of my own values, which is, you know, where they're not just cogs in the machine, where we're not just cogs in the machine, where we actually have all the aspirations, not just the aspirations, we actually have.
But I will say that if you go back to the origins of capital, like I, you know, got to work with Nestle on Stouffer's. We were talking about Stouffer's at one point. Vernon Stauffer, who created frozen meals, actually just wanted to create really healthy, nutritious meals that could be more conveniently delivered to people. And he would cook them and freeze them and sell them in a small geography. And then at some point, that company was bought by a conglomerate who wanted to be able to extract greater value, be able to pay the conglomerate in addition to the company. And so they started putting fillers and really terrible things in the product, right? That was a choice that someone made because the profits were more important than the health and integrity of the product, until it didn't work anymore. And people became better educated and became the income bifurcated. Poor people couldn't afford to buy it anymore. And rich people decided, ooh, that's crap, I don't want to buy it. And they lost the middle market. So I go back to, I think the market does kind of correct itself at some point where people start to say, ooh, not so good. And they went back and tried to, fix all that and recalibrate what it is they could have done. We've done it in the food industry. We've done it in the petroleum industry. We've done it in the healthcare industry. And now we're doing it in the tech industry. And my point again is, if you keep bringing that extractive behavior and that Milton Friedman kind of profit is the only thing that matters mentality, which really started more in the 80s than it was prior, then we will be in real danger when you use these exponential technologies, right? We can't go clean that stuff up as we're seeing right now in our social fabric and our political fabric. So we have to really, if only 1% in, how do you want to build it up to the 99%?
Look, we've seen some companies, and there's a great example in the UK, but I think there's some good examples here too, John Lewis, where it really is a collaborative, where every worker has a piece of the company and and has input and decision. Now, how much does somebody who's working the teller at John Lewis have to, how many stores they're opening up in Brighton? I have no idea. But again, there is some sort of collective that does participate in the profits. I think, what's the sort of high key canoe company that you probably know, that I know, that you buy all the, I've forgotten. There's one, and you gave a lot. Yeah, Patagonia. I think, isn't that also has some sort of collective where they get stock options?
But they definitely think a lot about their stakeholders overall. There's even there's 1% that they give away to Earth, and they call it an Earth tax, right? So no, they definitely are thinking about it from a more systemic place. So that's good business. What you're talking about, there's two different ones. One is good business, which is in the current model, how can I do it in the way that is really holds stakeholders well and thinks about all the different ways in which I can make the choices I make to decide what I buy, how I sell, how I distribute it, how I hire people, how I fire people. Anything is made through the lens of holding people well and putting humans at the center, not just profits. But then the second of it is, how will we change our organizational structures, period, to be much more distributed and organically come together and pull apart. And there's some really great examples of a nurses collective in the Netherlands, where they decide, rather than having this big, huge behemoth, right, this big organization that cannot scale and still be responsive at the same time, it's just outgrowing its ability to be able to be responsive. So they, this guy built a completely different model where you just have collectives of, I think it's 10 to 15 or maybe 20 nurse practitioner or nurse professionals. I don't know what all the different backgrounds are, and they together work out what their caseloads are and who's going to take which case, and they can decide, do I spend 2 hours with Johnny's mom today, or do I only spend half an hour with with so-and-so's mom, because they don't need that. And it's not legislated, it's not dictated through a handbook of procedures, and they've been able to bring healthcare costs down and satisfaction up, right? And engagement up, and people love their work again, and they're excited about their work. They're not just pushing paper around. So I think we've just built big bureaucratic systems that have robbed people of innovation and engagement and really good solutions. And if we actually rebuilt it, we could do it differently. So I'm not anti-business, and I'm not anti-capital.
No, you don't sound anti-business at all. I mean, I guess I just am wary. I don't know. I'm an optimist. I do think the future has incredible promise. But I guess as I've got a little bit older, is are we going to share in that promise? And the we is me, obviously, because I'm a maniacal, egomaniacal, narcissistic filmmaker. But seriously, but my children, the children of the world, the children of the planet, we are, at least for the time being, one human race.
Yeah. And we have to think about that. How will people, again, participate in increasing productivity? These technologies will increase productivity. So when you talk about autonomous cars, I'm all for it, right? Safety goes up when you've got autonomous trucking or things. Hopefully, if they're electric, the health of the planet gets better. We build, we have less trips, whatever it is. But the problem is then, what happens to the truck driver? Right? Because the person who owns the algorithm for that self-driving car has now extraordinary, even amplified, exponential wealth, and it isn't distributed across the whole system, right? Whether it's the truck driver, the hotel, the diner that he or she went to, the
gas station, all the people that in the gas station.
So it's okay, but that doesn't mean that we should hold on to a broken system. Otherwise, we would never have invented the cotton gin. We'd still be picking cotton, right? Because it's like, oh, let's make sure people are in the fields picking cotton, even though it's really inhumane for them to do that. So I don't think that we should be protecting jobs that are not healthy, great jobs, and that technology should come in. But then this goes back to the bigger question: what is the societal scaffolding that holds people well in this society that has this great productivity? Right? And universal basic income is one potential solution, although we actually should be really thinking, do we want that centralized? Is that a centralized government or not? Does that feel really like such the place that we want where they can control all of that? Maybe not. I've kind of become less a fan of that. Is it a way in which we can, like Andrew Yang is now advocating for a digital dividend where the data that we create gets compensated in some way? Or I go to the Holochain world. If you think about the fact that we can have distributed hosting of it, you can create distributed apps that are distributed hosted, and there's a way in which you can actually we call it the holo hosting, which is the crowd becomes a cloud. I use excess capacity on my machine, or I can even buy an extra port, and suddenly we become the servers. We're no longer paying AWS. We're not paying these big huge conglomerates to host our stuff, and we're paying each other. We're distributing the productivity with each other. There's all kinds of ways in which we'll
so
be
which of those, because you just gave me 4 really brilliant examples of ways that we could actually make our future better, more efficient, fairer. I could think of lots of other words for it.
Healthier.
Which of those do you think, because they all require system reinvention, I'll call it, or at least system, not complete destruction, but some reinvention or some pushing of the limits of our present system. So which of those that you just named and others do you think are most likely to happen, and when? I'm putting here, this is where you earn your futuristic chops.
No, I'm a strategic futurist, baby. I give you the option.
Well, all right. So that just gives
but
you
no,
a
but here's the thing. I also, I don't know that I would put a bet on any one of them. I think we're going to need the system of the systems, right? We will need multiple of these options. I don't think there's just one. And so my colleague and I created this, coined this term called cultural acupuncture years ago, right? But the idea of like UBI puts its pin in here, or a distributed version of that, which I think would be probably healthier. A digital dividend goes over here, a way of being able to include people in the actual advances of digital technology. So again, if you think about the holo hosting model, as digital life grows, people participate in that. Like that's good for people as opposed to it usurping and taking it away. So these are all models that I think if each person is out there, or each group is out there doing it, as entrepreneurs are doing it, government leaders are doing it, finance people are doing it, it will radiate and create the healthy society. I don't think it is the work of one entity or one group or one solution to solve.
We don't have one solution.
No, but we should all be orienting toward how do we create a thriving and inclusive dynamic society. And if we're all oriented toward that and incentivized to orient to that, it's interesting. If you look around the world, different people, different countries have different feelings around technology because of how they are held. In Sweden, my understanding is they are not anti-robots because they're like, we're not protecting the job, we're protecting the worker, right? And so when you have a system that protects the person.
They also have no unemployment as well. That helps.
But then you bring in innovation. What I'm saying is they played around with UBI early in terms of figuring out ways that people could still create value while they were also getting a stipend. So it didn't have to be one or the other. And they saw that, things improved. And so we're learning about these systems. We just have to, what's actually interesting about UBI, I was turned on to it about 10 years ago, became an advocate for it. And people were like, it will never happen, never happen. And here we are, right? But I've heard that over and over again. I remember being in a meeting, however many years ago, hearing a CEO will never tweet.
That's funny. That is very funny.
So I'm just saying, it's these things that we think are never, never, never that suddenly become possible. And so for me, the fact that we can have a distributed economy and a distributed way of exchanging and coordinating and creating value with one another is the solution for me. I think all the systems right now are broken. I do not think we're going to be able to fix them. We won't be able to regulate our way to a healthier way. And so I am tunneling under and building the next.
So give me a hierarchy of challenges. If if the top challenge is, I don't know, climate change. I'm not saying that is, but what is your hierarchy of human challenges?
I think each of us are designed to fear different things, right? So you can worry about climate change and go put your energy and time there. And I can worry about that. I think that we're about to lose a generation of kids that are really scared and have been through too much trauma. And if we do not solve that, then we're going to put exponential technologies in the hands of traumatized young people. And I think that that's actually really scary, right? So I'm working really hard to try and change that narrative. I want youth to feel well held and safe on this planet and prove to them that we know what the hell we're doing. That is actually where I'm probably putting most of my energy. Bias around AI, I think, is really very real. If you work in artificial intelligence or machine learning, you realize that it's a thing that isn't software. It grows and it takes data and it's got its own sort of process and drift around it. So it is so easy based on the data you choose, the question, the way that you ask the question, how you, whatever, there's many choices. It's actually much more human than you think it is in the design of it. So you need to have a lot of brains in it. You cannot do it in any homogenous group, whether it's all just, white suburban women or whether it's all, brilliant Indian men, whoever it is, it's going to be biased no matter how they do it. And
so how do you solve that particular one? How do you regulate it? What do you do for that particular one?
Well, I think we're really trying to raise significant awareness, and we're trying to build pipelines of talent. Right? Like I'm trying to make you more aware of the fact that there are 100 brilliant women futurists so that when you're thinking about your show, you can know where to go find them. They're not like, because, women promote themselves differently than men. And so we need to work a little harder. I want to encourage more women to step into the ring. Of the top 20 business books, only 3 have been written by women. If you look at the VCs, it's 7%, I think, either are women or give to women. Like the numbers are atrocious. So I just want to keep advocating for we see the bias, we address the bias.
I'm advocating. I went straight. I'm advocating. I agree. I think
but I'm just saying there are ways we just keep doing it, right? And then there are people who are building really big, huge solutions, like my friends who are building Holochain. Or and back to the capitalism thing, I just want to give a plug for partnerism. Partnerism is the work that came out of the Center for Partnership Studies by Riane Eisler over the last 30 years. She's written 13 books, but 2 of the most recent are Real Wealth of Nations and Nurturing Our Humanity. And she really advocates for the fact that we transcend capitalism and socialism, which are both dominance-based systems, like it's either you have the power or I have the power, to something called partnerism, which is this idea that we share power. It's power with versus power over. And she can talk about societies back 4,000 years ago, and there were models for it in which it was brilliant. They were innovative, they were healthy, they were, all the things that we want society to be. It existed until we became nomads and started feeling we need to take over everybody. And this idea that greed and power became the metrics or the dominant technologies of the day. There are ways of being able to rebuild this that are actually healthier. And when I hear about partnerism, and I hear about Holochain, and I hear about regen villages, and I hear about, vertical farming, and the fact that and I think about a 3D printed house, and I think about a society in which the costs come down and thrivability goes up and people don't have to work so they can just buy food. They don't have to drive long trucks. They can actually be in their garage tinkering, or they can be in their studio creating, or they can be in their community volunteering, and they get compensated for that, or they get held as a societal citizen for that, right?
As you were saying, I just had this vision of this guy who's really happy, like he's given up his truck, he's gets to play like professional darts or something, but he decides that he wants to take the truck out. But he's not allowed to anymore, because in that society, you're not allowed to, because they know that the AI that's driving these trucks are much more stable, let's say. I mean, it's an interesting, but it is interesting, right? I mean, we have a whole huge set of other problems that we have to figure out if we have this beautiful future that you certainly and I hope for.
Well, I'm trying to build it, right? I'm actually actively trying to advocate for it and build it to whatever extent I'm given permission to go do it. Like, this is an awesome opportunity to talk about that and get other people, to feel inspired by it. So yeah, there is that. But I do think it's happening fast. This is the issue. Over the other transitions that have happened over the course, of 100 years, and people had time to adapt and figure out what the regulation should be and what the work rules should be, and trying to figure out how to do it in more in healthier, better ways. This is happening so fast, and people really caught off. And so that's, to me, the torque. I'm trying to reduce suffering, right? As much as I want to build a better future, I don't want to be blindsided. I want to reduce suffering. So how can we do that in a way in which people don't get caught in the undertow of the change? Because at some point, I really do believe it will be phenomenal. But between now and then, fear breeds authoritarianism, breeds really, poor choices. Fear breeds otherism, and we need to reduce the fear.
But I love that you're trying to be a catalyst and being a catalyst and encouraging all this. And me too. I mean, the only reason we made not the only reason, I guess, but the main reason was really to have conversations like this, or at least to get people to have really immersive feelings around the change that was happening. I mean, that's why we did it. So
I'll give the one last thought, and then I will let you go, which is that, this book that I'm finishing in 2 weeks that will be out in fall is this whole invitation to leader reign. It is a more dynamic way of thinking about it. So I do think back to your systems you were changing. It's about mindsets. And so if leadership was a 20th century invention to be able to scale efficiently and to be able to ensure that we always have, short-term profitability, leadering is just a different thing. It's not an organizational approach. It's a mindset. It's dynamic and inclusive and caring. And it's designed to constantly spur innovation for long-term sustainable value. That's a really big shift. And if we can shift people from this, like, again, static hierarchical noun to a dynamic, caring, inclusive verb, we will have done really good work.
If you're going to present this, and you are in the form of this book, my first, I imagine you're going to get a question, because I've been on both sides of this. You're going to get a question. Well, give me a contemporaneous example of how this is working. And the example that I would use if I were you, or an example, would be Black Lives Matter. There is no leadership. This is local movements who have these set of values that are creating real change, hopefully lasting change. We'll see, but hopefully real change. And this is,
that is an example of a distributed system that is great, and that is a portion of leadering. But I will say leadering, even inside big organizations, can be part of the mindset. I don't think it's just an organizational structure, right?
No, I get it. I get it.
Like I would say that Unilever deciding to disband quarterly profits and quarterly reporting and say we're a long-term stock play is leadering.
That would be wonderful. I don't see much.
I mean, they did that. They were up there. Paul Pullman, when he was CEO, decided that no, we're here for the long term. We're not playing the short term game anymore. And he's really investing a lot in purpose. And they're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about reskilling and the work of the future. So they are a great example of leadering. Now, is every one of their products completely clean and perfect? No, right? We would like for them to all become all clean and perfect. Every one of their marketing campaigns empower people and not make them feel, concerned about the smell of their body. No, I'm sure they still, shame people for not having the perfect deodorant, but they're working their way toward being a company that really is an example of the fact that you can care about people and still be a great organization, a company.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your work. And it's been fun chatting to you. And next time I actually get to travel anywhere in the world, which hopefully will be soon, and I land in Austin, Texas, I will look you up and I will buy you a drink.
Thank you for including me in your lineup. Thanks for doing these interviews. I think it's important for people to hear all these different voices and perspectives. So thanks so much for.
Thanks a lot.